Muito antes do início da era moderna dos discos voadores, em 1947, pilotos em todas as partes do mundo já afirmavam estar observando objetos voadores não identificados voando pelos céus. O ápice foi na Segunda Guerra Mundial, quando tanto aliados quanto países do Eixo afirmavam ver objetos luminosos voando a grandes velocidades. Esses objetos foram chamados de Foo Fighters. E hoje trago para vocês uma entrevista onde um pesquisador minuciosamente analisou cada caso que se chegou até ele. E a conclusão é surpreendente. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, boa madrugada aonde você estiver. Eu sou Thiago Lechiquete. Sejam bem-vindos ao canal Desvendando Mistérios. O meu entrevistado de hoje é o ufólogo britânico Graeme Rendall, um dos maiores especialistas na pesquisa de casos envolvendo pilotos e objetos voadores não identificados, ou os UAPs, como são chamados hoje. Graeme já escreveu 4 livros sobre o tema, sendo um deles muito premiado, sobre os avistamentos de pilotos durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial, o que cunhou o nome Foo Fighters. Vem comigo então, nessa entrevista inédita e exclusiva, onde Graeme fala sobre a sua pesquisa e a sua conclusão, que eu tenho certeza pode surpreender alguns de vocês. Mas antes, não se esqueçam de se inscrever no canal, marquem também o sininho para não perder nenhum vídeo novo. Deem também o seu like e aquele joinha em todos os vídeos do canal e também comente todos os quase 500 vídeos do canal. Eu quero saber a sua opinião e compartilhe este vídeo e o canal para que possamos crescer cada vez mais, trazendo assuntos interessantes para você. Hello everybody, thank you Graeme for being here at my YouTube channel. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm pretty sure that we're gonna have a lot of information about your work, your amazing work, because I'm gonna show you now. I have this book. It's not small, it's very big. And I have this book as well. This one. I think I have the whole collection. And this one. So thank you very much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the invitation. It's great.
And I always start with the same question to all my guests in my YouTube channel. When did your interest in ufology begin?
So probably in about 1973 or 1974. So it's quite a long time ago. As you can see, I'm sitting out in my garden here in the north of England. So it's a bit cloudy. There's not much light, unfortunately. It's mid-afternoon. So apologies for the lack of kind of light on my face. So 1973, 1974, I was interested in science fiction. So I was reading quite a lot of science fiction at the age of about 8 or 9, and my mother bought me a book which she thought was another science fiction novel with a nice picture of a spacecraft on the front, except it was a flying saucer and it was a book about UFOs. And so I read it and was interested and wanted to read more. So yeah, that's where my interest began at a very early age.
I think it's almost everybody starts like this in an early age. And I always start with when I start to read, learn to read, I start to read UFO books and magazines and comic books. And you are the author of the series of the books that I showed before on UFO and UAP pilot encounters.
Yeah.
Spanning from the 1940s to the 1954.
So far, yes.
Yes, so far. I hope so. And what has driven you to write these 4 books so far?
Okay, so before I was interested in UFOs, I was interested in aeroplanes. I was my parents bought me model kits, model aircraft kits to build when I was about 4 years old, as early as that. So I was interested in aviation before I was interested in UFOs, and I was also interested in World War II and German secret weapons. So that's where the Foo Fighters book came into it. And then once I'd finished that, and people seemed to enjoy reading that particular book, I was wondering how I could sort of follow that. And obviously having an interest in things that fly, I felt there was a bit of a niche in terms of people's, the books that people had written beforehand to cover simply pilots' encounters or aircrew encounters with UFOs. And I thought that since I have a little bit of aviation knowledge, then that might be a nice way to actually, to write books just dealing with pilots and aircrew who see UFOs, and not just tell the same old stories, but actually dig out much more obscure cases, and not only just confine these stories to a few lines in a book, but actually to expand upon them, to present the whole of the intelligence reports connected with these cases, so that you see everything there is to do with a case, not just an author's sort of concise reference to a case. So 5 or 6 lines maybe, which you don't get that much information. And I remember when I was a child, when I was reading these UFO books, I always wanted to know more about a case. And of course, sometimes there isn't more about a case because it's one of these unknowns. But as I've found when I've started researching a lot of these old cases, there's much more information out there. It's just that people either haven't had the time or the inclination to include all of it in previous books. And I thought this was a good way of doing it.
And these books are amazing, very good, very a lot of information, and the new papers, clippers as well. There's drawings, there's reports, and this period comprises the Second World War, where pilots saw the Foo Fighters.
That's right, yeah.
What did the pilot think these objects could be?
Well, even before they were called Foo Fighters, and that term comes from American crews at the end of November 1944, but even before then, in the Second World War, pilots were seeing things that they didn't understand. So whether they were what looked like structured craft, or whether they were simply lights in the sky, they were seeing things as early as 1940, so right at the beginning of the war almost. And because things like flying saucers and UFOs, UAP, whatever you want to call them, that wasn't on people's radar back then. It wasn't part of people's dictionaries, part of people's lexicons. So it wasn't a phrase that people used or understood. Then they naturally thought that these things were German secret weapons, because, well, what else would they be? Everybody was developing better weapons all the time. There was more new technology coming along. So naturally, if something that really looked really strange and maybe was very fast or very maneuverable in the skies, then naturally the thoughts came along, well, this must be something that the Germans have developed, that they may be flying for the first time, or maybe this is about to come into service. So there was a lot of thought about that direction in terms of these lights, these craft being something the Germans had cooked up. But as the war went on, British and American intelligence sort of thought, well, we're not getting anywhere with trying to understand what these are. And it was a bit of a sideline to a lot of other things that were happening in the war. So there were some attempts to try and work out what they were, but it was very half-hearted. And by the end of the war, they still didn't know what these things were.
Yeah, and we have records of Foo Fighters, as
Yes.
we know now, from the First World War? Because I have another question to you about that.
Okay, yeah, we do. There is a book that somebody called Nigel Watson wrote about UFOs in the First World War. So yes, they were reported back then as well.
And I have this book as well. So I have many books. Some rumors say that the famous German pilot in the First World War, the Red Baron, Baron, would have chased or been chased by UFO and even shut it down. Was it real?
I don't know. I've heard that story as well from Baron von Richthofen, and I don't know what to think. It's one of those stories that I guess it probably happened so long ago that it'll be impossible now to be able to say whether or not it happened, because all anybody who might have been a witness to what happened will be long dead. And in the war, and also in the Second World War, the reporting and the sort of information that went around the reporting wasn't great all the time. So therefore, we don't really have all the information that we need to be able to make, sort of qualified judgments on what took place. But it's certainly intriguing and certainly interesting for that particular story.
Yeah, that is. And during the Second World War, was there any territory that where these objects were seen more often?
So yeah, they were reported in certain areas, and if you go back between, say, the end of the war and about the mid-1990s, the available information on the Foo Fighters and other things like that was that they were basically seen in a part of eastern France, eastern Belgium, western Germany, some parts of the Pacific Ocean, and that was about it. But actually, once you start looking a bit more deeply through the records, through the squadron records, through mission records, that kind of thing, it builds up more of a picture, and that these things were seen much more widely. So they were seen off Norway, so Scandinavia. They were seen off the Russian front. They were seen in the Balkans, so Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, places like that. But they were also seen in northern Italy. And there's also a case actually of part of what the Brazilian fighter squadron that was based in Italy during the World War II, and one of the pilots there reported seeing something that he didn't understand as well. So that's a story in the UFOs Before Roswell book.
That's great. That's great. And yeah, that's it. It is in a book. And in your research, do you have any cases where the pilot shut down a UFO, trying to shoot down? Is there any report of that?
There are lots of reports of either dogfights, so aircraft either chasing or being chased by strange lights. But there's also quite a few cases in the squadron records, particularly the Royal Air Force squadron records, so the British Air Force's records, of air gunners in bombers flying over Germany and other places, seeing lights approaching their aeroplanes and actually opening fire on them. So, but the outcome is that nothing happens when they fire on these lights. The lights don't explode, they don't fall away in flames. They just seem to sit and take the bullets. In some cases, there are reports of one of these things do go down. So it's almost like they're being shot down. But there's no sort of follow-on information of they couldn't do any kind of retrieval of these things if they did come down, because they were falling apparently over enemy territory. And it's not clear in fact what these things were anyway. Some are described as orange discs, others are described with as being delta winged, but they're actually reported at night. And the only delta-winged aircraft that the Germans actually flew was the rocket-powered Messerschmitt 163. So they basically, that they couldn't really do anything back then. That all these the reports they're inconclusive as to what really happened. So, sorry, I'm actually just a neighbour's just asking me something. Just excuse me. Hello. I don't. Sorry. No. Sorry. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Let's keep it. So, do you think that the German? Some rumors says that again that the German had shut down some UFOs from in the second War, or they had trying to reproduce this object.
Yeah, I mean, the stories of the Germans seeing them in World War II, full stop, but the actual documentary evidence around those claims simply doesn't exist. There's plenty of people who are saying, well, the Germans saw them too, but when you try and actually obtain that particular information, it's nowhere. The files don't seem to exist. There are people who have said, well, there's prisoner of war reports that point to German pilots having encounters with strange lights, etc. But I've looked through a lot of the prisoner of war accounts myself, and I've yet to find something. Now, that doesn't mean to say they don't exist. It might just mean that I haven't actually come across them yet. But yes, it's quite difficult to actually pin that one down. And if anybody that listens to this knows of particular documentation that relates to that, then I'd love to hear from them. In terms of the Germans maybe reverse engineering something that might have come down, in territory they controlled or over Germany itself, then yes, it's entirely possible. Again, though, however, the information that it sort of circulates around these claims isn't very. There's not much to it. And the information that does exist, that we've heard about either in reports or in newspapers, etc., doesn't really add up to much. And it's also riddled with inaccuracies or things that don't really add up anyway. So again, they end up being nice stories, but in terms of how much truth there is to it, I've yet to see it, unfortunately. Like I said before, that doesn't mean to say it didn't happen. But you really need some evidence to go with it before you can say, yeah, that definitely happened.
The curious is that we are talking about some cases from the Foo Fighters from the 40s or before. And now it seems that our modern pilots are having the same experience at the World War, right? What do you think about it?
Yeah, it's interesting that there are these parallels between what happened 80 years ago and what's happening now. So you have US Navy crews who have had essentially a dogfight with a Tic Tac back in 2004, the Nimitz encounters. But also they've been seeing things off the west coast of America, off the east coast of America as well, and in close proximity with these things. Well, this happened a long time ago. It happened even before Roswell, before Kenneth Arnold in 1947. It happened into the early 1940s. And if you believe reports that came out even before that, then there were things that were called ghost aircraft flying around in the 1920s and 1930s over various parts of the world. And even before that, the so-called ghost airships of the late 1890s and into the early 20th century. So these stories, come around, and it's nothing new. And yes, there are plenty of accounts of dogfights and things like that during the Second World War, where aircraft tried to either chase or were chased by strange lights and strange craft. So the things that are happening nowadays, they don't seem to be new events. They're things that have happened before.
I think the most famous dogfight was the Tian Incident in Iran in 1976. Can you tell us a little more about it?
Yeah, as far as I understand, it was an F-4 Phantom, an interceptor that was launched to try and intercept an object or a light that was seen over the city. And the pilot at one stage attempted to actually fire a missile at this particular object. And of course, when he did so, all the instrumentation in the aircraft sort of became inoperable. So you could, if you sort of go down that route in terms of believing the story, then it seems that whatever he was facing or whatever he was chasing after and trying to bring down, had some interaction with the systems on board his aircraft. And again, even that's not a new story in terms of objects or lights that have been chased after, and then it turns out there's been things happening with the aircraft of the people who have been flying after them. So again, we have this kind of thing where even these major stories that happened, 1976, it happened almost 50 years ago now, and even that's not the first time things like that apparently happened.
Yeah, and and recently the Italian ufologist Roberto Pinocchi made a public document from the Mussolini government about the crash and recovery of a UFO in Italy in 1933, much before the Second War, and much before the Roswell.
Yes.
What do you know about that? And do you think that document and the story behind this wrote in that document is true?
So it's not just one document; it's a series of telegrams. The information that was released about that, and then there's also some letters that appeared about 3 years later or so, and Yes, okay. On the face of it, it's the information is quite compelling in terms of it pointing towards not just sightings of things, but actually a crash or a landing, and a craft being stored by the Italians in a hangar, only to be picked up by either the Americans many years later at the end of the Second World War. So, if you look at that just at face value, then it's a really interesting story, and you think, aha, well, here's your smoking gun. Here's something that definitely happened in 1933, and this is the basis of everything that happened afterwards. However, it's not entirely it hasn't been proved 100% that those documents are genuine. They did have an expert look at the documents, and he said that the paper was accurate and the ink and all the rest of it. But those reviews, although that expert kind of examination of the information hasn't been duplicated, and nobody else has apparently been able to look at and examine the documentation to see whether it's true or not. So I think having like a second opinion and maybe somebody else to have a look at it, and then you've got you can compare the kind of the expert sort of examination. I think that'd be a good idea. But to date, that hasn't happened. So I'm a little bit wary because there's been ufology is littered with stories that appear, and then people claim that they have documentation regarding certain events, certain things that took place in history. But when it comes down to it, the documentation can be slightly suspect. And we all know about, we've all probably heard about stories like that. So it's a bit of a shame, really. And unfortunately, the information that the researchers got a hold of to do with this case actually was given to them anonymously. So they don't even know the person apparently who provided it to them. So you can't check that out either. And we're all familiar with the MJ12 documents, which weren't actually documents. They were photocopies that were put in an envelope and pushed under somebody's door. And it's still not clear, exactly who provided that information, nor whether they're correct or not. And the consensus of opinion, this far ahead in history, is that they're probably a hoax. So, you can see that just because you have something that sort of points to something that we all would like to be true, it doesn't mean to say it is.
And in these documents tells that the United States just got the UFO after the war, got the UFO to the United States. And tell me, how is the UFO phenomenon is seen in the UK? UK has some, UFO crashed, or that MOD department when was shutting out, they just close it and never open it or get interested again.
That's right. So the MOD, the Ministry of Defence in the UK, took the decision more than a decade ago, it's almost 15 years ago now, to close down what was the so-called UFO desk. It was a department in Whitehall that actually one of its duties was to take phone calls from the public or letters from the public, which were inquiring or reporting UFO sightings. And Nick Pope, who people will be aware of, he's a personality on the UFO circuit now, but he worked on the UFO desk between, I think, 1991 and 1994. And his one of his roles was to field these calls from the public, and then that information would be passed to a different department. It wasn't something he did, but if there was any investigation of these cases, it would be done by other people. And then anything that went back to the original reporter, person who reported the sighting, he would be the one who would pass on information back to them, or sort of tell reporters what UFO policy was by the government, such as it was. But at the same time of them closing the UFO desk, there was this mantra that the government decided that was going to be the official line regarding UFOs in the United Kingdom. It was so much as that for 50 years, there hadn't been a sighting which was of defense significance. So in other words, they didn't think it was any kind of threat. It wasn't anything that needed to be investigated. So therefore, there was no point in funding a UFO desk because they said they didn't need it. And that money would go elsewhere to where it was required. Obviously, governments around the world are short of money, and they're always trying to find ways of saving and passing on money to other places which are more deserving as far as they're concerned. And this just happened to be another victim in defense cuts at the time. But things are still being reported every month, every week. There are still stories in the news or people posting on Facebook or on Twitter, etc., about things that are seen. Now, most of the time they're just simply lights in the sky, but sometimes they're slightly more than that. And of course, over even this 50 years that the government reckon there's nothing of defence significance happened, we've had some fairly significant things happen in the UK. So in 1980, we had the Rendlesham incident, where there was an alleged landing outside a US Air Force base in East Anglia, in the east of England. And then in August 1990, there was the infamous Calvine craft that was seen in Scotland. It was photographed from the top of a hill. Now, both of those cases have never been resolved to any great satisfaction in terms of what they were, or what the history behind it was. So it's interesting for the government to say, look, there's nothing of defence significance, when even they can't say what these things were. Or if they can, they're not telling people. But then to say, well, there's nothing of defence significance, but when you push the government or you push the Ministry of Defence to say, well, what were they don't tell you, or they can't tell you. So it just seems very, very strange.
The Richmond Forest incident is very famous and known here in Brazil, but the Calvin crash, I never heard of. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. So this is the 4th of August, 1990. So it's a Saturday evening. It's about 9 o'clock in the evening, but it's a summer evening, so it's still light. And there are two hotel workers. They're based in central Scotland, in a hotel in a place called Pitlochry. It's a small town, and they decide to actually walk up a hill on a sunny evening when they're not working, and one has a camera. And they're on this hilltop, and they see this. Well, from the photographs, it's a diamond-shaped object, and it has what appears to be a very small tail or an appendage, something that's sticking out on the right-hand side. Also in the picture as well, which you can see a fence line, a wire fence along the bottom of the picture. So it's being the camera is pointing towards the sky. There's not much kind of landscape in the picture. There is also an aircraft, a jet aircraft, a military aircraft in the photograph, but it's very small and it's almost impossible to say what it is. It looks like a Harrier aircraft, a vertical takeoff and landing ground attack aeroplane. And according to the report that was actually phoned in to an RAF reporting centre in Scotland by the actual people who were concerned, the two witnesses got in touch with the Daily Record, which is a newspaper in Scotland, and that information was passed to this RAF reporting centre. And in terms of the information that was passed on, they said that the witnesses said that this thing hovered in midair for quite a long time. I think they watched it for a five-minute period or something, and then it just shot upwards in the air and disappeared. So it actually went up vertically. And at the same time, not just one Harrier, as seen in the photographs that one of them took, but actually there were two aircraft flying round and round. So they were in the area, but obviously they can't hover really for long periods of time, but they were flying around these mountain valleys near where this object was. Now, whether they were associated with this testing maybe of something strange, or they just happened to be in the area, or they were there to intercept this object, it's not clear. But one way or another, these two men, one of them actually took a picture, or several pictures, 6 pictures in total, of this particular object before it vanished. Now, the pictures were also given to the newspaper, and they found their way into the hands of the Ministry of Defence because the MOD asked for them, and the paper basically just gave them the information, gave them the film, without taking copies themselves. As it happens, the RAF press officer in Scotland, who was charged with delivering the information from the newspaper to the Ministry of Defence, actually kept a copy of one of these pictures, one of these photographs. So that's how we have a copy today, and this is the one that people have seen if they've looked for the photograph for the Calvine object. So we actually have one of the pictures now. Before that, all we had was a crude drawing of what one of the photographs looked like. And for about 30 years, that's all we actually had to look at. But now we have the picture, so that's great. But the jury's still out as to what that thing was, whether it was some secret American vehicle of some description that was under test over the UK, or was it, was it something, completely different? Was it something that we simply don't understand what it was? It's, at this stage, we still don't really know.
Oh, sorry. Okay. In 2018, the leak of Pentagon videos sparked the world's interest in the UFO phenomenon again.
Yeah.
But what many don't know is that this leak starting in 2016. Could you explain that to us? It's because it was an email from Hillary. I think so.
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. Could you mind repeating it? Sorry.
Yeah, many people think that the leak of the videos started the UFO matter again in the government. But in an interview that you gave, this leak started in 2016, before the presidential election in the United States, right?
Well, actually, one of those videos was around much earlier. It was, as far as I'm aware, it was one of those 3 videos was floating around on a German website about as early as maybe 2006, 2007. So some of the information regarding those 3 famous videos, has been sort of in circulation for quite a while. So, but it just happened that those 3 videos did actually come out in 2017. So it's not as if information regarding what was encountered by the pilots off the Nimitz, etc. It wasn't sort of known by a few people, and wasn't out there in terms of if people knew where to look.
And during the pre-election of the United States, I think there was an email from Hillary Clinton talking about the UFOs or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you know about it?
No, I'm not really aware. I mean, I know there were emails between John Podesta, which I think was one of her advisors. But yeah, that's not something I've really looked at in any depth, I'm afraid. So I can't really sort of quote chapter and verse on that to you.
No problem. But you carried your own investigation in 2018 about these videos and this information. What are your conclusions?
In terms of the 3 videos, I mean, they definitely show anomalous objects. As to what they are, I still don't know one way or another. My investigations aren't really anything at all. I know as much as other people do, and that's very little. Beyond what's been sort of suggested, they're not. So you can rule out things that the people have said they are, like other aircraft and balloons and all the rest of it. But the gimbal footage is just so weird. And that was the one that when I looked at it, I just thought, that is just so odd, that thing. I don't know what it is. And to suggest that it's a jet aircraft at 30 miles going in the opposite direction, that's for the birds, I'm afraid. It can't be that. Your guess is as good as mine as to what they are. I really don't know what they are at all.
And you have contacts with scientists, researchers, journalists, and people directly involved in this government. This is not, let's not say cover up, it's like. What do these people tell you about what the government already knows about the UAPs?
It depends on who you talk to. Some people, there's been a history of people claiming that they have access to certain information, and some people no doubt do, but other people are just probably making up stories. And then when the people who do or have had access to various things in the past, they're not able to say a lot, because sometimes they have non-disclosure agreements, which effectively forbid them from saying things to people like me who aren't read into certain programs. And even then, they're not allowed to speak to those people either, because these things are compartmentalized. There's secrecy involved. These people some of them could go to jail, if they divulge what they learned during their time, involved in in official UFO investigation programs. And of course, I'm talking about Lou Elizondo there. That he's somebody I know, and I've sat down and had meals with him before. But in the course of conversations with him, you know full well that he can't tell you everything that he knows. So there's no point in asking him, because you will simply get an answer where I can't tell you.
That's correct. That's correct. Well, in your opinion, are the UAPs a threat to air safety and the national security?
I mean, I can't say they're not, because that would be naive. And we don't even know if it's just one group of beings, for want of a better word. We don't know who's coming here and looking at us and interacting with us. It could be one group, it could be more than one group, and obviously we don't know what all their motivations are and what their end game is. So to say that they're not hostile, if that's what these things are, then that would just be stupid to say that, because we simply don't know. We don't know what the plans and what their motives are. So we can't say that. We can't also say that they are definitely hostile. So we're sort of stuck in the middle a bit, as we simply don't know. Like a lot of things to do with this phenomenon, we know little bits of information, but it doesn't add up to much, I'm afraid.
We're talking about military pilots that saw UFOs, but the civilian pilots, are they afraid to talk their experience with some UFO during the flight?
They are. I mean, they've been afraid. It's not necessarily afraid. It's more of a reluctance to report things, and that stigma has carried on for decades now, for years. Even in the late 1940s and early 1950s, airliner crews civilian airline crews who were seeing things, when they did report things, it was getting into the media, so it was getting into the newspapers. And you can imagine that the companies that they worked for, the bosses of those companies, would not be happy, because there would be adverse publicity connected with the people going on film and on the news and being interviewed about these things. Because if the upshot of reporting is that the Air Force turn around and say, well, you're just seeing weather balloons, or you're just seeing Venus, then that puts a bad light, in terms of how the pilots are viewed. Because if they're seeing things and they're misreporting them, then the obvious sort of question would be, well, why are they flying airplanes? Can we entrust our safety and also the passenger safety to these people? So you can see where the stigma arose originally. It's because there's a kind of an issue about people's reliability. And if a pilot or a first officer, aircrew, think that their jobs might be in jeopardy or their career prospects might be in jeopardy because of reporting things that they don't understand and what the possible repercussions of that are, then they're not going to report them in future. And of course, that just continued over the years. And it got also to the point that, there were official policy that there could only be reported a certain way. And no doubt people were warned that, you shouldn't be reporting this. In the military, there was actually rules and regulations that said they had to be reported a certain way, and they couldn't talk to the media anyway. So there's another level of kind of not just stigma, but bureaucracy as well, which gets in the way. And of course, if you disobey orders, then there are strong repercussions. But also in the civilian sector, if pilots did come forward and report them, despite their companies probably not wishing them to do so, then no doubt that didn't bode well for their future prospects, flying for that airline. So yes, you can see why a lot of people didn't come forward.
And we had in Brazil in 2022 audience in Brazilian Senate, where we could speak about the Brazilian ufology, and we had now in United States, and we will held in Mexico. What do you think? What this interest just came upon from the politicians and the governments?
It's strange, isn't it, that it just seems to be like there was a tipping point and it almost just spills over. But I think in some cases, politicians are simply chasing votes. I think it comes down to a lot of that. But also, if you have a groundswell of public opinion, then the politicians can't ignore it. They can. It doesn't matter what issue, whether it's a social issue or an economic issue. If enough people start talking about things, then sooner or later, some politicians will engage with it. And it might not just be because they're chasing voters. It might be also because they are genuinely interested in something, and they're genuinely interested in either solving it or making it better for people. So UFOs are no different. And some politicians are genuinely interested in the subject and probably do want to make progress. But again, it's like the stigma we're talking about for airliner crews. It's a potential career breaker if you start being known as the politician who is into UFOs. But if you get enough of them together, then there's safety in numbers. And if there's enough credible information that comes out of public sources or from whistleblowers and from sightings and from reports and documentation, then there's a bit of a safety net there. There's a bit more kind of the politicians probably feel a little bit more comfortable in actually sticking their head above, into the firing line sort of thing. That they're more comfortable talking about it and discussing it because it's a more credible issue, and it's not just treated as being a joke, because a lot of the press around the world still believe it is. But more and more, little by little, we're actually seeing lawmakers and decision makers actually getting on board with the subject. Yes, there are still plenty out there who think it is simply still a joke, but as we've seen in America and of course in Brazil, and to a very, very small extent in the UK in terms of a House of Lords debate 2 years ago, then the issue is getting discussed at the highest echelons of government. And that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I hope so. And what can we expect from the US government investigation of UAPs?
Oh, that's a good question. It depends on how much pushback there is from other people. So, just because some politicians are engaged doesn't mean to say everybody is. And you don't know what pressure is being applied on them from other quarters. So not just other politicians, but maybe people in the military, etc., and people who fund their political campaigns. So it's not as easy as them just to come out and say, "Look, I'm interested and I want to solve this." Because there is pushback. We know there is. So what will happen in the next few years? Hopefully there'll be at least more congressional hearings like there have been recently, and that there'll be other witnesses come forward, to use the term whistleblower, like David Grush, other people who are at the heart of these investigation projects or who have specific knowledge of things, not just people who have had other people come up to them and tell them things in positions of authority, but actually people who were involved either on the ground or who had specific sightings, have specific knowledge of actual documents or in other investigations that happened around the UFO issue, for them to come forward and tell their stories under oath. So you can't just like tell a story and get away with it. It's things where you have to actually tell the truth. So yeah, more of that, please. And hopefully that just then builds up the momentum. It gets talked more about in the press. You start getting more airtime, which reaches more people, gets more people involved, and hopefully you get more politicians, more decision makers, more people in the media, more influential people involved in the subject.
Just to finish, what
Mm-hmm.
are you working off? What's your planning? What's your projects from now on?
Okay, so I am in the middle of writing the history of the pilot and aircrew sightings from 1955 and 1956. So that's one book I'm working on. But I'm also working on a sequel to the Foo Fighters book, UFOs Before Roswell. So that's also being researched at the moment. So yes, I'm quite busy in writing at the moment.
So let me know when the books is on sale, because obviously, for sure, I'm gonna have it.
Gonna add it to your collection.
Yes, and to read and study. This is most important.
Fair enough.
And my friend, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your information with all from Brazil. and I hope we can meet soon.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
So we're gonna meet soon, and it's gonna be great.
I've started traveling the world now. I've been invited to various things abroad. So yes, I am not just based in the UK anymore in terms of appearing at conferences, etc. So that's lovely. So yes, no doubt we will bump into each other at some stage. I look forward to it.
That's great. Thank you very much, my friend.
Okay, thank you for the invitation again. It's lovely to speak to you.
Thank you.